Wait, what's this yellow stuff on here? Dang it, this is screwing up my vibe. I'm supposed to be darkness, not this holy light crap. Cue the music. Hello there and welcome to my ultimate guide to the Dark Knight in Final Fantasy XIV. In this video I will be covering the job niche and overall fantasy of the Dark Knight gauges, offensive cooldowns and abilities, openers and rotations, defensive cooldowns, party utility, and then handy macros. Finally, I will capstone the video by going over the pros, cons, and a final personal rating of the Dark Knight class. The Dark Knight is our resident edgelord, wielding the power of darkness and a sword as long as their body, but in spite of that, they're one of our sworn protectors as a member of the tank class. In terms of the fantasy of the Dark Knight, you're going to be producing berries of darkness, spilling blood, eating souls, carving and splitting your opposition with your blood weapon, or salting the earth. Or maybe summoning your literal dark side, which is a freaking... I'd say it fulfills that fantasy in full, but playing into the fantasy, the Dark Knight honestly has what is, in my humble opinion, the absolute best job storyline in the entire game. I won't give spoilers, but it truly is something that I'd say makes it worth leveling the Dark Knight, even if you're utterly disinterested in ever playing it or tanking in general. The storyline also weaves beautifully into the skills. In terms of what the Dark Knight brings to the table gameplay-wise, it is the tank that bar none, is able to take the most burst of any of the tanks. Featuring the utterly gigantic The Blackest Knight ability, the Dark Knight can produce a shield for 25% of their health every 15 seconds. Not to mention it carries alongside itself extremely powerful magic mitigation. In my personal experience, this has made the Dark Knight the absolute most preferred main tank in the game for its ability to swallow tank busters like they were cake. If you like that, then head on over and sign up for the Dark Knight. So let's hop right into the Dark Knight's core class gauges and mechanics. The Dark Knight's mechanics and how they play are extremely interwoven into their gauges, and so this section will be a bit more meaty than prior sections that I've covered. If things get a little overwhelming or complicated, don't worry. I'll be going over the rotations confirmed by experts I consulted in the Balance Discord in depth in the following section. The Dark Knight features two distinct class mechanics between the DARKSIDE gauge and Blood gauge. However, I want to point out here that you might also really want to treat your MP bar as another gauge, and that is something to always keep in mind during combat. That being said, in terms of the MP bar, we don't really have a special unique gauge to monitor it, and unfortunately to date I've asked many people if we can somehow have a separate floating UI element with the MP bar indicating how much is in it, but unfortunately it has been tied together with the HP bar and at this point in time under the UI element called the parameter bar. You can move around that parameter bar and make it bigger, but ultimately you're not going to be able to get that kind of separate gauge feeling to monitor your MP really closely. Before leaving the discussion of MP, it's important to note that outside of the passive regeneration of MP in combat, you have three abilities that will assist you in restoring your MP. Siphon Strike that will give you a burst of 600 MP when using it, Carve and Split that will also restore 600 MP upon usage, and Blood Weapon, which is a self-buff that will restore 600 MP with every weapon skill used while under its effect. For the record, if you're under the effects of Blood Weapon buff and you use the Siphon Strike ability, you will restore 600 MP for each effect to the total of 1200 MP, so it absolutely does stack. However, note that Blood Weapon does only last 10 seconds and has a 60-second cooldown period. Lastly, you cannot stack piety materia in your gear to increase your MP regeneration rate, as the piety stat only impacts healers, so don't be one of those Dark Knights parading around in full piety materia melded gear. And yes, that is apparently a thing. I'll get into the details of why your MP is really something you need to keep your eye on very soon, but for now just keep it tucked away as something super important. Moving on to the Blood gauge, this features a bar that can range between 0 and 100 and a glowing job crystal that I've heard many people refer to as a heart, so if you ever heard that term thrown around, then you know what they're talking about. That if it is glowing with a spinning edginess about it, then you know that you have your tank stance, also known as grit, activated. Otherwise your tank stance is off, and then this is just gray and lifeless. For all practical intents and purposes, the most critical part of the Blood gauge is the bar. The Blood gauge can be drained in increments of 50 to cast two extremely hard hitting abilities of the Dark Knight. First off, we have Quietus, which is an area effect ability dealing great damage to targets around the Dark Knight. And secondly, Blood Spiller, a powerful single target damaging ability. Lastly, but most critically, you can also spend your Blood gauge on Living Shadow, which will summon a To assist you in combat, this absolutely must be used on cooldown and should be one of the first abilities that you prioritize to use in a rotation. It is honestly such a huge help, and he can crit. He's also dealing about 400 potency per ability, so he's very significant. And so you will generate blood gauge by performing certain actions or being under certain status effects. I'll cover them in bitter detail in damage rotation section, but for completeness sake, you will generate blood gauge using Soul Eater granting 20 blood gauge per use, and Stalwart Soul granting 20 blood gauge per use. Also, while under the effects of the self-buff blood weapon, you will generate 10 blood gauge per weapon skill landed. Remember that this is an ability that only lasts 10 seconds and then goes on a 60-second cooldown timer, so using it at a time when you have low MP and low blood gauge is really going to be beneficial to you. Finally, in a fair discussion of the blood gauge, there is now another self-buff called Delirium, which will allow you to execute the 2 abilities that cost blood gauge, Quietus and Blood Spiller, without paying their cost for a grand total of 10 seconds. This means that you can fit in 5 Quietus or 5 Blood Spiller into the duration of Delirium. This is actually something that I need to say, if you're not actually able to fit in all 5 in that buff time, you're actually going to want to make sure that you melt skill speed in good detail. Here on the screen right now, I have currently a breakdown from the Balance Discord where you can actually see kind of like the suggested breakdowns. I myself currently go for 2.39. It might be a little overkill for me, but I like kind of having that cushion room right now because I don't exclusively play the Dark Knight. The DARKSIDE gauge is a gauge where I found some people get confused about some aspects of it, but hopefully I'll be able to help clear things up here. If you see the helmet here and it's dark or grayed out, it means that you're not under the effect of the self buff called DARKSIDE. DARKSIDE is a 10% damage increase buff that you can and should maintain on yourself as much as possible. If you use an ability that grants DARKSIDE such as Edge of Shadow or Flood of Shadow, the gauge will light up as shown here and indicate a countdown timer of how much time is left of DARKSIDE before it goes away. The 2 abilities that grant you the DARKSIDE buff are Edge of Shadow and Flood of Shadow. These abilities grant you 30 seconds of the DARKSIDE buff up to a maximum limit of 60. However, this is where mentioning how critical the MP bar is really starts to creep into existence, because each of these 2 abilities costs a grand total of 3000 MP per cast. Keeping in mind that our maximum MP cap is 10,000, this means at any given time that the most casts that you can do of these abilities would be 3. While it might sound great to spam these as soon as you have the MP ready for them, MP unfortunately is also used for the extremely critical The Blackest Night buff, which is also inseparable from any discussion about the gauge. So the Blackest Night grants the Dark Knight a shield equal to 25% of their total health on the mind-blowingly low cooldown of 15 seconds. Taking my current health on my Dark Knight, I have roughly 120,000. 25% of that would be 30,000. So every 15 seconds, I get a 30,000 shield. To say that this is a hallmark of the Dark Knight would be an understatement. It is an absolutely fundamental aspect to every piece of content you're going to do, and so I'd say to get it on a very comfortable and very familiar button. The only drawback is that this costs 3000 MP, and here's why I said it is very critical to be mindful of your MP bar, because say you pour all of it into spamming Flood of Shadow during a large mob pull pack in dungeons, and you're then denying yourself the ability to use the Blackest Night and tank the mobs better, and your healer probably deserves a good pat for all their hard work at the end. Now, a lot of Dark Knights I've grouped with in random extreme primals or expert roulettes think that this might be a net DPS loss. This isn't necessarily the case. When you have your shield completely broken, you gain what is called Dark Arts. Dark Arts is a single charge that cannot be stacked, indicated on the gauge by this yellow icon circled in the screen. This allows a 1 free cast of either Edge of Shadow or Flood of Shadow, but not the Blackest Night. Just to be 100% clear, you can only have 1 Dark Arts charge, and if you accrue another through the Blackest Night shield being popped yet again, you'll not get 2 charges, so try and plan the use of Edge of Shadow or Blood of Shadow. So one way that you could think about it if damage is all you cared about was the Blackest Night is just a roundabout way to get to Edge of Shadow or Flood of Shadow with your 3000 MP, but in a way that really does help your healer a significant amount and opens up time for them to contribute to damage as well. For the record, I'm not just saying that the Blackest Night is really good. Even when consulting my experts at the Balance Discord for the absolute optimal rotations, the Blackest Night was one of the first abilities to be cast in both single and double weave rotations. Therefore, it is totally worth casting and has been confirmed through rigorous number crunching. So now let's start tying things together. In terms of AoE rotation, the Dark Knight has a 1-2 rotation of the circular AoE's Unleash and then Stalwart Soul. Stalwart Soul has the added benefit of restoring 600 MP on cast and will add 20 points to Slytherin. The Dark Knight features a 1-2-3 combo of Hard Slash into Siphon Strike into Soul Eater. Siphon Strike has the added effect of restoring 600 MP upon use. Soul Eater will restore 300 HP upon use, which is for sure an added benefit to relieve the healer of some minor amount of stress, although it is unfortunate that this isn't broken into a shield or partial shield, because if you are already capped at max HP, then this effect is essentially going to go to waste. However, Soul Eater has the very critical additional effect of increasing your blood gauge by 20 when it is used. And now that wraps up the rotation aspect of the Dark Knight. I know that was really quick, but that is really all they have rotation-wise, as all of the rest of their damaging abilities are outside of any rotation. I will be omitting abilities related to the Dark Knight's gauges as we have already covered them. Abyssal Drain is an off-global cooldown ability that hits for 200 potency and heals you for 200 potency per target hit. Being honest, this is an ability that shines greatly in large pulls in a dungeon and can really truly assist a healer who has fallen behind in a dungeon. However, in raid situations, it is just another handy 200 potency to throw out there for added damage. Salted Earth is a targeted ground AoE that deals 60 potency damage per tick and lasts 15 seconds, so roughly you can think about this as 300 potency off the global cooldown to launch out there and just deal more damage. Unmend is our range damage ability, which also increases the aggro of the target towards ourselves. This will be one of your 2 openers for doing pulls if you're in a situation where it would be exceedingly dangerous to other players in your party. Spamming Unmend for chip damage is far better than none. Finally, we have Plunge, which is our gap closer ability. Plunge features a maximum of 2 charges where 1 charge comes back every 30 seconds, meaning that you can have this ability up and ready to spam charges. So be on the lookout for raid buffs such as Trick Attack that will increase the potency of this being put in the off global cooldown. So putting it all together, we can see that we have a few overarching themes. And our first overarching theme is going to be generating MP to spend on Edge of Shadow, Flood of Shadow, or the Blackest Night. MP should never be left at 10k and should always be utilized. My rough rule of thumb, generally speaking for content generally, is outside of the opener, you really want to be kind of sitting on roughly 3k MP at any time so that you can pop the Blackest Night in an emergency situation when it's really necessary. But if you're very familiar with the fight, then I say go ahead and blow it to 0 as long as you know what you're doing. Just make sure that you have 3k on reserve to use Blackest Night to eat a tank buster, and of course that's going to give you the Dark Arts buff that you can then use for free Edge of Shadow or Flood of Shadow. I should say though here is that you really want to make sure that the Blackest Night shield is actually going to be used, and if you're taking very light damage such as you're only taking 1 mob, then it's probably going to go to waste and you will not get a Dark Arts charge because the shield will not actually be popped. Although in dungeon pulls, generally speaking, because you're going to be pulling more than 1 mob, always spam the Blackest Night as long as you have your DARKSIDE 10% damage buff on. There's nearly 100% chance of it during large pulse breaking, so go use it, and honestly it really helps the healer a ton. So kind of the theme is never sit on a full MP bar. Spend, spend, spend. The second overarching theme is very similar. Never sit on the blood gauge and let it be capped out. Always make sure that you're splending the blood gauge, as it will not store anything above 100. There is nothing extremely critical to say for the blood gauge to warn you about, for other than maybe time it with raid buffs so that you get even more damage. So I'd say pretty much feel free to spam it whenever you feel is the most appropriate time, typically with like something like Trick Attack. Lastly, the third overarching theme is the Blackest Night, and as I said before, put this on a comfortable key, as this will be the entire kingpin of your kit, and it is by far the most powerful defensive cooldown in game right now. And not to mention, when you use it and have your shield break, you get a stack of dark arts, and so you get damage. And I've said that a few times, but I really want people to start using this ability more when I heal, so trust with me, it helps your damage too, I swear. So, with all of that being covered, let's get into the details of the rotations. How to say it, the Dark Knight has 2 different openers that really depend on your ping, and this is going to be on a case-by-case basis, and so I cannot say all scenarios will fit all players. These openers are going to be differing on single or double weave, which refers to your ability to use the off-global cooldowns between global cooldown abilities. So take the off-global cooldown abilities, Salted Earth and Plunge for instance. Double weaving them would mean using both of them between 2 global cooldowns like Hard Slash or Siphon Strike. Single weave means that you can only fit in just Plunge or just Salted Earth between Hard Slash and Siphon Strike, and you cannot fit both. So honestly, you should always prefer a double weave rotation if you can get away with it, as it is gonna be a net DPS loss to go to the single weave. But again, you're gonna have to test it, you're gonna have to see what you do. You might need to tweak your skill speed numbers, and that's actually something that I really want to get into a bit of detail now. Aspect of these rotations is the fact that you must be able to fit in all 5 blood spillers into one single 10-second duration delirium. This is a chart posted by the user Nitro on the Balanced Discord with all of the advised skill speed tiers, and this will again require testing from you to see based on your ping, just based on how you play, what's actually going to work for you. 1015, but you can see from this chart that there are a lot more tiers that you can go into. I personally am at 2.39, so based upon all of this information, really just make sure test. If there's one thing that you take away from this video, it's don't just blindly follow this, like make sure that this works for you. So just diving into the double weave rotation, in raid situations you will typically be the main tank as the Dark Knight, and so ensure that you have grit on and then proceed to buff yourself with the blood weapon and the Blackest Night as you charge the boss and get ready to hit it with hard slash from the 1-2-3 combo. Off the global cooldown, follow up with Edge of Shadow, giving you the 10% damage buff followed by Siphon Strike. On the image you're gonna see a potion here. This is referring to the consumable to increase the strength called Tincture of Strength. Don't worry if you don't have it though, because that is pretty solid endgame raiding consumables, and most people will not care about this. This leads into the ability Soul Eater, which will give you a grand total of 50 blood gauge that you should be immediately spending on Living Shadow to summon your dark side. Use Hard Slash to start your 1-2-3 rotation, followed by this double weave of Plunge and Salted Earth. Select the 2 of the 1-2-3 rotation and execute Siphon Strike. Now do a cast of Edge of Shadow followed by Delirium. Before we complete the 1-2-3 rotation with Soul Eater, we will now be in the Delirium phase, and this involves double weaving between each cast of Blood Spiller. Do not press the Soul Eater button, as this Delirium phase comes way before it and is more important. You're going to be pressing it after, but hold off on that one. After the first Blood Spiller cast, double weave in Edge of Shadow with Carve and Split. Second Blood Spiller is followed by Edge of Shadow with Abyssal Drain. Third Blood Spiller is followed by Edge of Shadow followed by Plunge. Fourth Blood Spiller is followed by no weaving or off global cooldowns. And finally the fifth Blood Spiller is followed by no double weaving or off global cooldowns. Finally close off the 1-2-3 combo started earlier by casting Soul Eater. Once you're in this phase, you're going to continue to execute your 1-2-3 combo and cast the Blackest Night or Edge of Shadow to lower your MP and Blood Spiller to lower your blood gauge, making sure that none of that really goes to waste. So if you cannot do double weaving because of ping or whatever issue, this rotation is advised for single weave. Use Grit, as again you're most likely to be the main tank and should be on. Start by you popping a consumable if you have it, and no worries if you aren't at endgame and can't though. Then follow up with the same cast of Blackest Night and Blood Weapon as you rush to the boss and try and pull with Hard Slash. As this is single weave, follow up immediately with one cast of Edge of Shadow, raising your damage by 10%, Siphon Strike, and then lead into Plunge. Cast Soul Eater, and now you have 50 blood gauge and should immediately cast Living Shadow. Let's start their 1-2-3 combo over again with Hard Slash followed by Salted Earth. Now similar to the double weave combo, you are going to hold off by completing the rest of the 1-2-3 combo later. There's only one double weave necessary here, and so make sure that when you cast Siphon Strike, you then press Edge of Shadow followed by Delirium as fast as you possibly can. I know it's a single weave, but this is going to be really important that you have that Edge of Shadow into the Delirium, and so no more double weaving after that though. So now you're in the 10-second Delirium phase. Blood Spiller 1 should be followed by Edge of Shadow, Blood Spiller 2 should be followed by Carve and Split, Blood Spiller 3 should be followed by Edge of Shadow again, Blood Spiller 4 should be followed by Abyssal Drain, and finally Blood Spiller 5 should be followed by Plunge. Now finish the 1-2-3 combo that was on pause during Delirium phase, and the opening rotation is complete, leading into your normal 1-2-3 rotation and making sure that you manage your MP and blood gauge as well as you can. For the area of effect rotation, you'll generally want to start by using the Blackest Night and Blood Weapon combined with a defensive cooldown like Rampart. However, in practice, you'll want to hold on to Blood Weapon and the Blackest Night a touch bit longer in my opinion. Typically, since you're a tank, you're going to start with Rampart, and since the duration is far longer than the other two abilities, I'd really open up with that. Then you're going to be, since you're a tank, primarily focused on pulling the mobs using Unmend or using Unleash to make sure that you grab all of the mobs around yourself. Whether you use Unmend or Unleash and Stalwart Soul really does depend on how the mobs are positioned, and so just personally use your discretion in that, and I will actually be covering that in a tanking video that I'm going to kind of post later about just generally tanking mechanics and how you kind of like go about doing that. However, the main thing is that you get aggro and that you clump all the mobs up beforehand, because you're going to be doing circular AoEs around yourself. So once you have all of the mobs picked up up now, I'd pop the Blackest Night and Blood Weapon, probably fitting in another cast of Unleash on the global cooldown right there. But then you're going to follow up by using Flood of Shadow to get 10% more damage buff applied to yourself. Then dive deep into the rotation by using Delirium and spamming Quietus 5 times. Vivian Plunge, Carbon Split, and more Flood of Shadow casts between each. I just recommend that you sit about 3,000 MPs so you can always keep the Blackest Night up, as in most cases you're going to be the tank and you're going to be taking a lot of damage, and that's going to really honestly help your AoE rotation because that'll pop and then you're going to get another Flood of Shadow ability free cast, and meanwhile be really helping out your healer. The one caveat here is that you're going to want to hold Abyssal Drain. I know that you have it off the global cooldown and it does 200 potency, so it's really tempting to push. You're going to want to wait until you've taken a good chunk of damage, and that 200 potency heal per mob can massively help out the healer if they're struggling. And as candidly as I can say it, the Dark Knight is not known to be the best tank for long overtime physical damage pulls, so this is probably going to be very handy to keep on hand rather than throw out for damage early on. Now it is time to talk about the defensive tools that the Dark Knight has. Let's start off first with the general defensive cooldowns shared by all of the tanks. Rampart is our 20-second duration, 20% damage mitigation ability with a relatively short 9-second cooldown. This is the workhorse of the entire tank roster, and key to the Dark Knight is that this is one of the few cooldowns that they have that can mitigate physical damage. In particular, they only have 2. Next up is Reprisal, that is on a 60-second cooldown, which is a 10% damage reduction on a single target that lasts 5 seconds. This is a fantastic move for reducing the damage from tank busters or raid-wide area of effect abilities. When you are tanking with a partner, it's ideal if you can coordinate who uses Reprisal and when, such as if there's a raid-wide AoE used directly after a tank buster like an Eden 2 Savage, you're going to be wanting one of them to be assigned to the tank buster and then one of them to be assigned to the raid-wide AoE. Next up is Arm's Length, which is an ability that seems to be misunderstood by a lot of the community, unfortunately. This ability is really essential due to its ability to prevent knockbacks in raid scenarios. However, this ability also is extremely useful during large trash mob pack pulls, such as during Expert Roulette dungeons, and makes a huge difference in how much damage is heading your way, as trash mobs that hit you with this buff on are slowed by 20% for 15 seconds. I should make note here too, as the Dark Knight does have the limited physical cooldowns as before. This is a really important ability to keep up, and you're going to definitely want to be rotating it during dungeons. Next up we have Low Bolo and Interject. These abilities do not directly mitigate damage themselves, though you could consider the stun damage mitigation. Instead, they're more meant to interrupt enemy casts. So if you see an enemy casting something you don't like, interrupt it using Interject or Low Blow. One example of this being used in a raid situation is during Eden 1 Savage, when you need to interrupt the add phase cast. But in less intense scenarios like dungeon pulls, the healer will appreciate if you stun a mob for 5 seconds. Might not seem like much, but as I said, it really does add up. So now let's dive into the Dark Knight specific defensive cooldowns. The Dark Knight has the ever essential The Blackest Night ability that is on an incredibly low 15 seconds cooldown and lasts 7 seconds, blocking up to 25% of their maximum HP. As discussed before, this is about a 30k spammable damage sponge on my current HP, and it is awesome. I want to take a quick second to say how insanely powerful this is too, because in the past I have criticized particular job mechanics like the Warrior for interfering with the HP bar and that leading to tremendous amounts of overhealing, especially when paired with a healer that doesn't know you. The Darkest Knight's Blackest Night ability really doesn't interfere with their healing and can't be overhealed because it's a shield. It can, however, be wasted if you don't use it during, say, a tank buster or when you're being hit by a lot of mobs. However, the healers can generally expect it to be up because of its super short cooldown, meaning you essentially stay in your lane while offering consistent and reliable mitigation. The more predictable you are in a raid scenario, the better in my opinion. But also in my opinion, the Dark Knight did pay for this tooling, as their options to mitigate physical damage are fairly limited in comparison to the Gunbreaker, for example. The first new defensive cooldown for the Dark Knight we're talking about is Shadow Wall. This reduces damage taken by a whopping 30% for 10 seconds, but the drawback is that it is on a relatively long cooldown timer of 120 seconds. Similar to Rampart, this is especially noteworthy to write down, as it's one of the 2 defensive cooldowns that actually lowers the incoming damage of physical attacks. The second defensive cooldown is Dark Mind. On a pretty low cooldown timer of only 60 seconds, this ability will reduce any magic damage taken by a solid 20%, so for a 60-second cooldown, that's pretty significant. But that's the key word, magic damage. This means that this paired with the Blackest Knight makes the Dark Knight able to hilariously swallow raid boss tank busters, but as this ability is not practically useful during say an expert dungeon pull that is primarily physical damage based for the record, this is where the duality of the Dark Knight becoming both obscenely a fantastic tank meets the Dark Knight's limitations for a prolonged physical combat engagement. Next up is Dark Missionary, which will reduce all magic damage taken by you and nearby allies for 10% for 15 seconds on a 90-second cooldown timer. This is a handy ability as it's instant and can absolutely help healers during raid-wide AoE. Also, it can be used to cushion the blow of a tank buster itself, so if you are in a pinch and you need it, hey, you have that. That's really all that the Dark Knight has for defensive cooldowns to mitigate damage directly. As you can see, the physical options are pretty limited, but magic damage is laughable. At the end of the day though, the Blackest Knight is going to be your core go-to defensive cooldown in any situation, and in situations where you may have Rampart, Shadow Wall, and Arm's Length on cooldown, this is going to absolutely be spammed to offset damage. Although, to be fair, you should be spamming it the entire time because Rampart plus the Blackest Knight is huge. Lastly, I want to talk about the Dark Knight's Living Dead ability. This is the Dark Knight's oh crap button for them to ignore mechanic. This ability lasts a pretty fantastic 10 seconds, although this is on a relatively low 300 second, and this is low relative to tanks like the Paladin at 420 seconds or the Gunbreaker at 360 seconds. However, this ability has some pretty serious drawbacks that need to be discussed here. First of all, your HP is not protected when you're in Living Dead state for 10 seconds. Say you pop it when you're at 1 HP. If mobs keep hitting you and your healers do not heal you, then you're going to be stuck at 1 HP. Actually, even if they heal you, the mobs can damage you back down to 1 HP, so yeah. However, if you do use it at full HP, your HP isn't going to be lowered like the Gunbreaker with Super Bullide, so there's no real serious drawback when you do that other than a wasted cooldown. The trick is, however, that you are theoretically reduced to having less than 1 HP during the duration of this ability, that you do need to be healed for your entire pool of health before the 10 seconds duration is up, or you'll be instantly killed when that's done no matter what. This can be extremely stressful for healers like the Scholar that doesn't have a tremendously easy access button like the White Mage does for Benediction, which would like fully heal the Dark Knight for the record. But on the flip side, it is very easy for that White Mage to heal off using Benediction. But I do really want to be clear that I did say that you need to be healed like for your full HP. Let me clarify that. You do not need to have your HP fully capped to 100% during the duration. The Dark Knight's HP bar does not need to be 100% filled. However, if you see my HP right now, it's about 120,000. I need 120,000 healing pumped into me over the duration of Living Dead before the cooldown expires or I'm dead. It doesn't matter if I never have full 100% HP bar, so long as 120,000 health is healed. Such as if a pack of mobs wants to keep me at 50% HP and I can never get to 100% cap, but the White Mage has healed 200,000 health, that satisfies the need and I don't get KO'd. So now let's talk party utility. I plan to make a general tanking mechanic guide video explaining tank swapping, pulling, and aggro in the next few days after posting this video. By the time you watch it, it might already be up, so I will put a link to that video in the description when I get it up. So I'll quickly go over the 2 tank aggro management abilities. So first of all, you have Provoke, which is going to put you at the top of the enmity meter on top of the target. This is whatever the last highest target's enmity number was plus 1. This is necessary to use when going from off tank to main tank, or for pulling back a mob if you lose aggro on it during a pull. Sure, transfers 25% of your enmity to a target party member. This is strongly suggested to use when doing a tank swap from main to off tank, and if those stances and main tank versus off tank doesn't really make sense to you right now, I totally encourage you to check out my vid when it's out. In terms of other party utility, the Dark Knight brings Reprisal and Dark Missionary, both of which can be used to reduce the damage dealt to the party from a tank buster or raid-wide area of effect damage, as we talked about before. And again, I'm going to really strongly advise that you're going to coordinate with whoever's your tanking partner and make sure that one of you covers all of the things. The Dark Knight also has their beefy 25% shield to offer allies, but in most cases you're going to be wanting to put this on whoever is the main tank. Most often that's going to be yourself, but if you are playing the off tank, then you'll want to pass it over to your tanking partner. Considering how tanks are for the most part even on how much HP they have outside of a warrior using particular buffs like Thrill of Battle, you can generally expect this to be a 30,000 shield to your partner, which makes them extremely able to eat a solid tank buster to the face. It's really quite welcome as you don't risk overhealing them, and it's very predictable and reliable. So you get the same main tank perks as kind of like an off tank. Handy macros is actually a little bit complicated to discuss here because on one hand you really do want to precast the Blackest Night on yourself before pulling, just like you're doing your full single target rotation we covered earlier. The other side is if you are the off tank and you just want to be able to launch it when you see the cast bar of the tank buster, you're really going to want it to be as easy as possible. So can't really advise the one macro to Blackest Night because of this. Even if you are off tanking and want to target the main tank for a tank buster and apply it easier, I mean, this following could help, like this macro could really help you. So kind of like my only thoughts on if you do want to use that is maybe you have the Blackest Night on one of your hotbars in 2 different locations. One for the macro and one for the one without a macro, where if you press the one that is not a macro in the opener, then you press the macro during the fight itself to ease your need to like manually target and apply the shield. Of course, if you are the main tank yourself, this is much less a worry, but you never know. I mean, I have off tanked as a Dark Knight. However, one macro I can say truly made a world of difference to me was the Salted Earth macro that you see on the screen right now. So what this does is it casts Salted Earth at your target without you needing to fiddle about targeting it and placing it manually. It just does itself. While this sure could theoretically be bad if you have a situation where you do want to manually place it, which is in my experience more of a kind of timing thing, like do you want to start it before pull or during, like when you already have the mobs around, then it's not going to be good. But for me, I personally do like this macro, and it just made it just another mindless one to press that's just going to add damage. Lastly, here is the Shirk macro that gives your target 25% of your enmity. This is handy for when you don't want to target your tanking partner directly, like moving your cursor and whatever else, but you do want to pass off some of the aggro their way. This also ensures that during the tank swap phase that your tanky partner has already used Provoke, making them the target of the target, which makes Shirk worth casting and useful. So now for my personal review after playing the Dark Knight across Savage Raids, Expert Roulettes, leveling, the storyline, and so much more. In terms of the pros, the Dark Knight is bar none the best tank for eating tank busters. Honestly, with the Dark Knight, it is extremely easy to combine their 20% magic damage mitigation from Dark Mind up every minute alongside Reprisal and the Blackest Night to see a tank buster that might bring a warrior's health bar close to 40% or potentially lower as literally 0 damage to the Dark Knight. Next off, I'd say that even as an off tank, the Dark Knight brings a solid array of utility. Instant cast 25% shield and instant cast 10% magic mitigation for the entire party is awesome. The Dark Knight is absolutely capable of being a great supportive tank on passing on that gigantic shield to their main tank. Thirdly, I'd say that the Dark Knight outside of their opener has a very clear rotation and priority of their abilities. There's little cluttered or confusing internal rotations or massive cooldowns to shove everything you have into. They're very direct in what they do, and likewise I'd say that this makes the Dark Knight pretty friendly to newer players or players who aren't very comfortable with the tanking role in general. Actually, combining this with the Dark Knight's awesome tank buster eating potential, I'd say that actually they are probably one of the best tanks for someone new to playing tanks in this game to play. Oh, and let me not dare forget, their entire lore alongside their literally summoning a freaking, spoiler warning, through the Living Shadow is just incredible. Their kit alongside their lore is bar none unbelievably powerful in the fantasy department. There's no denying when I play the Dark Knight that I'm living that fantasy, and it feels really cool. In terms of cons, I'd say there are more like a few points of pain that I really want to bring up. First off, I wish that MP could be its own individual separate gauge, something like the blood gauge, where we could monitor it very easily and place the MP bar independent from the HP bar somewhere clearly envisioned on the screen. I'd also give it 3 lines to indicate 3000, 6000, and 9000 MP, and perhaps a glowing indicator to warn if the Dark Knight's MP is capped. I know that that's just like a quality of life issue rather than something intrinsically bad, but I really don't think it's unfair to kind of want this kind of gauge. Secondly, I'd say that the downfall is that it is very easy for a newer player to Dark Knight spam through all of their MP, just like spam their Flood of Shadow, Flood of Shadow, Flood of Shadow, and then they're like, oh, I'm at 0 MP, and now they can't use the Blackest Night to mitigate damage, and that's like what's going to be very stressful on a heal. Yeah, you have Blood Weapon and Siphon Strike and Split and Cleave, but when Blood Weapon and Split and Cleave are like off cooldown, you're at the mercy really of your passive regeneration and 600 MP per rotation via Siphon Strike, so just kind of something to be aware of. Thirdly, I'd say that the Dark Knight has a massively apparent disparity when dealing with physical damage mitigation compared to tanks like the Gunbreaker that just has a ridiculous array of tools to deal with that impacts both incoming physical and magical damage. Like, sure, is the Dark Knight really freaking good with the Blackest Night? Absolutely, absolutely. But you know, when it comes to like just pairing that with like a physical damage mitigation ability, the Blackest Knight becomes really strong with Rampart, but you can notice the difference in how much easier it is to break when you don't have Rampart active. And so that's just kind of an area of weakness just to be aware of. Is it gonna like impact it and make it impossible to clear? Absolutely not, as you could clearly see through the entire video. I was tanking and not having a problem. That's just something to be aware of, that hey, your healer might have a little bit more pressure during that time. Fourthly, I'd say that the Living Dead of all the tank cooldowns comes with the most risk. It has some perks like the low cooldown and the long 10-second duration, but the fact that if you aren't healed you're gonna literally be dead is really risky. I cannot lie about that, and it's just like, but definitely just something to be aware of. You can handle it, your healers can handle it, just be aware when you use this that you're gonna kind of have that effect and gonna need people to swoop in like that. I'd finally say that one last drawback of the Living Dead is that your HP isn't protected. Say the White Mage uses Benediction on you and you still have 20 mobs wailing on you. Sure, you won't die to like the Living Dead debuff because you've already been healed to full, but you will be brought down to 1 HP. Your HP is not protected with this buff on, such as with Gunbreaker Super Blide or Paladin's Hallowed Ground. So in summary, I can hands down say that I'd recommend the Dark Knight to anyone who's interested in tanking. It is extremely powerful, and while it does have some clear drawbacks, it makes up for them in spades with its mind-blowingly powerful kit. Being able to just eat a 40,000 damage tank buster like the Ricake is so freaking strange, yeah, and it relieves the healers of a lot of stress. The kit is also super streamlined in my opinion, and every ability and every rotation they have has a clear and defined purpose, and I think that's great for people starting to tank or veterans wanting to play something that kind of like just pilots smoothly. Not to even mention that like they are probably considered the most meta main tank out there just because like they can truly handle tank busters like it was a joke. Well, that wraps up this video. Thank you so very much for tuning in to my ultimate guide to the Dark Knight. I hope that this helps inspire you to perhaps try the Dark Knight, or maybe you learned a thing or two about them that'll help you play with Dark Knight teammates better. If you like this content and want to help support me, all I ask for you is to please press that like button and subscribe, and if possible, let me know what your thoughts are down below. Thank you so much and hope to see you in my next video. Have a great day.